Silently, the day had drifted by, shifting geometric patterns of light across the oubliettes floor. The impatient curiosity had loomed until the paranoia had lost its thrill, and then there was nothing left to do except wait and watch as the light of dawn poured past the bars in the window. Even that painful reminder of passing time was stolen as night approached, dousing her features into a silhouette and outlining them only with twilight. The last twittering of songbirds faded with the day, and Cassandra was once again abandoned to the night. Her gaze was soldered to the brace clasped around her wrist. She clenched it with one hand and twisted it until she could feel the skin chafe underneath. Her arms tensed as she pulled on the chains, visualizing them snapping, but it only left her palms calloused. She rolled the wayward locks of oily hair around her finger and tucked them behind her ear, and retreated into the recesses of her dreams as though the solution could be found there. The door creaked. Cassandra's purple gaze bounded toward the shadows with startled relief. It did not matter who or what came now. "The lady must be hungry," Marco bleated, "and how lucky the guest is, for this is a favorite of mine." The shadows drained like a receding tide as the bipedal hog shuffled in. "How do I know it's not poisoned?" Cassandra asked. The long black claws tinkered against the wooden tray as the troll placed it at the hem of his ragged cloak. "Such an ungrateful pest you can be!" He leaned over the tray and loudly sniffed the contents. He moaned with delectable anticipation, and then ripped a piece of cap from the broad hood of a huge mushroom. Drool stretched from tusk to tusk across his opening maw. "Delicious," he said, slurping, "and not poisoned." Cassandra's focus danced between the troll and the plate nested in the shadows between them. She had not eaten since the feast, and her belly had stirred several times from hunger. Slowly, her trembling hand reached toward the plate and snatched the cap. She hovered it defensively before her waiting lips, but kept her gaze locked on the troll. He waited. Hungrily, she ate. She could hear a granular crunch between her teeth as she bit in. She spit the bite out, appalled. "There's dirt in this." "Yes, there is, as there would be with roots and leaves. The earth feeds us all," Marco snorted. "What? Is it not good enough for you?" Cassandra replaced the fungus to the plate, then took the footed bowl. Twilight danced on the water's sloshing surface. The metallic smell was hard to overcome, but it was cool. She sipped at the cup, trying not to mind the stale flavor. The thick conical tail, riddled with patches of scales and dusted with thick hairs, flickered as the troll lord returned to his den in the shadows beyond the cell door. The hinges hissed as it closed behind him, and then stopped abruptly. "Oh, one more thing. I thought I should let you know that Sedwa believes in you." Cassandra just stared into the darkness, waiting for him to say anything else. "I just thought I should let you know." The door squealed shut, and the lock clanked, securing the cell. Cassandra returned to the monotonous blackness and the fruitless attempts to concoct some solution. "Mommy?" The voice trembled with a nightmarish timbre, as though incapable of finding the strength to scream. Cassandra's heart clenched. Her gaze rolled through the shadows, searching for the source. It sounded so close, as though it were swimming just outside of her, swimming with the anxious curiosity that loomed just beyond her. "Hello?" Cassandra waited for a response. "Do not be afraid. I hear you." The stale air answered with its usual alienating silence. The glow from the horizon was beginning to be swallowed by the purple night, and with it any recognition of the small window on the far side of the chamber. Cassandra sighed and turned toward the wall. She pressed the heels of her golden snakeskin dancing shoes into the bricks and pulled back on the chain. She could hear the metal snapping, but could only feel herself be pulled up as she tugged. "Hello?" the darkness said. Dirt plumed as she fell back to the ground. She crawled toward the wall and tried to stand. The voice had been so clear, spoken into her ear instead of whispered from some distance. She clung to the wall, afraid that the voice might reach out and grab her. Her imagination's 100 startled voices all rang in her mind at once, and it took several heavy breaths before she could calm them all. Hello? Who are you? Silence. Hello? She stepped away from the wall. Please answer me. Hello? The vacancy echoed through the chamber. Stop this! Let me out! She screamed to the window. Tawesh, save me! Please, somebody help! Her pleas streamed until her voice strained. Help! She coughed. Her strength waned. Help! She tearfully squeaked. What curse was this that constantly left her so crippled that she could neither act upon nor react to her environment? She was born into a status paralyzed from the beginning by its responsibilities. She had grown accustomed through the passing years to the restraining grasp of her superiors, who interfered whenever she reached out to anything, even her dreams. These new bonds were no different. What was wrong with her? She was a witch, defined by her right to intervene. She had the power to change the world. So why could she not do it? Under their restraint, she was not only incapable of saving herself, but she was forced through a gauntlet of guilt for not stopping an innocent child's torment. She had grown despondent at her own impotence. Her delicate hands clenched, and she rammed her knuckle into the gray stone. The skin broke, and streams of red trickled between her fingers. There was a dense pulsing where the bones and flesh had collided against the rock. She shirked back, biting her lip to deaden the pain. This is not right. This cannot be. The few degrees they had defected from their intended course had cost them the night of writing. Dyage's javelin had set before the dawn, and the last few hours of the night were traveled with no more certainty as to how close or far they were from their intended position. The passing dunes simply rolled beneath them. The ruins of the fortress were believed to be in the west, so when the towers crept up before them, it had become apparent that they had strayed, and dangerously close to the castle at that. The sun burned like molten copper as it ascended into the clear blue sky. The castle's looming ramparts had been polished smooth by wind-whipped sands, and squinted eyes struggled against the glare. The soldiers' averted gazes fell to their black shadows, which were stretched mercilessly across the undulating plain of sand. The horizon writhed under the torture of the blazing sun, casting mirage of life in the barren desert. Did you see that? The skinny youth's words poured out so quickly that they were barely intelligible. See what? Draco asked. I saw it, Dion, the swordsman Ramu added darkly as he curled the fingers around the handle of the narrow scimitar strapped to his belt. Dion's body was rigid with fear, and his cracking voice could barely escape. Something, he stuttered. Something moved. His purple irises darted about, racing to catch the next elusive clue. Draco's gaze returned to the boundless expanse of sand open before him, and slowly he searched the dunes. He ignored the archer's paranoia and grumbled, Ignore it. Keep moving. The members of the squad all breathed with tightened lungs, fearful that the whistle of their breath might awaken something. They redirected their course, and the castle scrolled by in the distance. Terracon kicked Ramses, driving the black unicorn closer to Prince Draco. The castle is falling behind us, the captain said, pulling between the prince and vizier. Do you not think it would be a good time to charge out? My prince, I would agree. Let us pick up the pace, Nesu added. Not just yet, Draco replied. We have the sun on our side right now. We will only kick up dust and jeopardize our position if we make a break for it. They bobbed silently as their steeds trudged across the sand. How is your family, Prince Draco? Terracon asked, finally breaking the silence. Draco chuckled. Julia is fine. She is spending time with her family in Wenador again. Of course, with the way my mother treats her, I'm not surprised. It would do them both well to be more amicable. Julia can be so sour sometimes. That is when I let the boys handle her. She has them with her now, which is better than if they were left here without me to watch them. Anthony is getting much better with his swordplay, and it will still be another few years before I arm Quentin. A moment passed before Draco continued. Right now it is my sister I'm worried about. Terracon chose his words carefully before replying. This journey must be painful for you. Do not play, Terracon. Apparently the captain's words had not been chosen carefully enough. Draco continued. You know her as well as I do. You were probably there more often than I was. I am fortunate that I have maintained my status as elder brother throughout my varied and foreign duties. Do not count yourself short, Prince Draco, Naso scolded. You are an honor to the House of Hexen. This is only a test of that glory. Draco ignored him. What was the last thing I chased her down for? Do you remember, Terracon? She was 9 and had gotten into an argument with Prince Merkener, Terracon supplied. That's right. He was telling her a story or something, right? Terracon nodded, confirming Draco's evasive memory. The prince continued, and he was being a stickler to the myth, and Cassandra wanted some other creature to represent black magic. Terracon recounted the tale. She ran off to the fields outside the Iman Woods. I'm still not sure how she came to be out that far. Luckily, someone in Runa had seen her. I should have known she was going to be trouble the first time Queen Osmara had me watch her. I lost her, and she escaped into the garden. She had scraped her knee on the walk, and I suppose I found her only because she could not get any further. That reminds me, I wonder how Her Majesty is faring. Draco rolled his eyes. She is no doubt in pain, Nesu began, but it is better not to inquire on the state of a daughter of Hexen. Terracon, I know that in your years of diligent service you have seen the Queen through many trials. There are, however, some things that no person, no matter how close they are, can ever understand. They are different from any other witch that you might meet, and require a special attention that none can offer. I am sure that in time, especially with your proximity to the Princess Cassandra, you will understand what I mean. Offer them what you can, and make peace with your shortcomings. They belittle all of us, Nesu warned. Terracon stared blankly toward the vizier, trying to soak in the entirety of his sage advice. Eloise's terrified wail caught everyone's attention with enough time to see her tumble from her saddle. Shadows flickered in the corners of their eyes, but they could not pry their sight from the grim scene laid out before them. Eloise peeled herself from her bed of sand and turned back to her fallen steed. The petrifying sight left her scream hanging in the back of her throat. The unicorn had fallen and whinnied painfully as it writhed in the sand. It tried to stand, but limp tendons were all that held the dislocated leg to the shoulder, and the hooves could only sway like pendulums as it thrashed furiously. A strange hissing filled the air, and, still petrified, the soldiers watched as the ground began to shift. The desert yawned beneath the unicorn, and the sand dragged the steed in its tow as it drained into the earth. Sheets of sand trickled over the drowning unicorn, pouring into its flared nostrils and mouth, leaving only one panic-stricken eye to stare out from beneath the dune. Its terrified whinnies called out until they too were buried under the sand. Eloise's arms quivered under the weight of her body as she leaned back as far as she could, desperate to distance herself from the horror, but utterly incapable. Her legs were stiff with fear. Her mind was paralyzed. The desert gasped suddenly and stole the ground from beneath her wrists. Eloise screamed as she fell backward and surfed the avalanche of sand to the bottom of a shallow pit. She gasped and held her breath against the potential of drowning in sand. She could hear the sand settle, trickling in narrow streams to the bottom of the hollow. It grew quiet. Slowly, Eloise pried open her clenched eyes and stared into the empty azure sky. Her breathing steadied, and she curled to sit up. A pair of sinewy arms splashed up through the sand and wrestled themselves tightly around her shoulders, pinning her arms at her side. "Eloise!" Terracon screamed and wheeled his unicorn back around. Eloise writhed against the strong hold, but her legs were propped awkwardly against the steep, sandy slope, and she could not muster the resistance to break free. The rustling sands began to give way beneath her, sinking her chest below the gravel. She could not pull herself up. Instead, she gave into the pull and kicked back over her head. A swift backward somersault wrenched her shoulders free, and, without a second glance back, she crawled away. The squeal of Draco's longsword being stripped of its scabbard heralded the command. "Daryl, take point. Find a way out," Draco hollered over the clattering weapons. "Move it, people! Move!" The trampling hooves drummed thunderously against the desert's crust. Eloise scratched the crumbling slope as she raced to exhume herself. She lifted her hand to Tarakon's, but the sand gave way beneath her toe, and she slipped back into the hole with a yelp. "Come on, Eloise," Tarakon shouted as he leaned off the saddle to reach her. "Do not leave me," she scampered furiously, gouging the wall with her hands more than scaling it. "I do not want to die like this." Her chest heaved violently with every desperate breath. She reached out to him again. Gauntlet met gauntlet with a clap of gloved hands, and their muscles pulled in unison, relying on the memories instilled through repeated practice in the fields. A grasping hand splashed up through the sand, curling its knobby fingers around Eloise's slender ankle. The elbow and wrist of the exposed limb dove back under the desert, and the strain of its pull wrung a scream from deep within Eloise. Tarakon's foot slipped from the stirrup, and he was nearly jerked off of the saddle. Ramses was not helping. Having watched in horror as one of his own drowned beneath the sand, and now forced to abandon the herd, Ramses' heart had grown fragile, and he fought frantically to get away. Tarakon tugged sharply on the reins and cursed the unicorn. He was not giving up yet. Eloise pulled tighter and tighter on Tarakon's arm, too anxious to get out to realize the danger he was in. She stared down at the fist clutched tight around her ankle and screamed again. Streams of sand drooled down the ever-sloping sides of the ravenous hole opening in the desert's floor, hungry to consume her. The shifting pool of sand that had settled at the bottom was draining. The gravel around the hand receded, slowly exposing the muscular wrist and nimble arm. More frightening still were the eyes staring out from the base of the hollow. The contracted pupils, swimming in glaring whites, peeked through the sand. Its cheeks were tense. The face ascending through the sand was smiling, a mouth littered with rotting canines. Through gritted teeth, it whimpered expectantly. The fright in Eloise's eyes matched the creature's wild stare. She kicked at her captured foot, cracking the reinforced toe of her boot across the violating knuckles. The dirt-crusted hand twitched with pain, and her ankle slipped away. Ramses hauled Eloise from the sinkhole. She tripped as she tried to find her footing, but Tarakon's grip was steadfast. She bounded beside the escaping unicorn for a few steps before Tarakon found the strength and balance to hoist her to the saddle. Her hand remained firmly knotted around his even after she crawled onto the saddle behind him. Leaned against his back, Tarakon could feel Eloise trembling. Her arms were wrapped tightly, almost affectionately, around his waist, and her shuddered breaths were warm against his neck. She needed a moment to collect the fragments of her sanity scattered by the encounter. Such a leisure could not be afforded, however. Flickering shadows were in pursuit, and bounding silhouettes were caught in the corners of their eyes. They needed to reach the others, and quickly. Daryl's escape had brought them to a steep ridge, and the unicorns wrestled against the shifting sands pouring down the dune slope. Spurred on by their riders, they leapt to their next step, but the weight of their load sank their hooves. Anarchy was beginning to delude Draco's resolve. He could not hear the question yet, but in the recesses of his mind he was trying to answer whether his sister's survival mattered more than his. He did not know what commands he kept shouting, but hoped that his helmet muffled Fear's signature vibrato from his voice. He pulled his unicorn aside and let Karen lead them after Daryl. His eyes leapt from person to person, counting off his squad. Ramu, Dion, Shem, Simon. Tarakon and Eloise, however, were still far behind and racing to catch up. The open plain of sand between them seemed to grow wider with every beat of Ramses' hooves. Every beat of his pulse ticked away the time that they had left together. Time drained away like sand in an hourglass. Lives, however, drained into the sands of the Vorsand.